Support for Podcast by Night comes from Midnight Syndicate. To find out more about their gothic horror instrumental music, please visit midnightsyndicate.com. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to Podcast by Night. I am your host, John Long.
And I'm Jennifer Wolf.
And here we are again for another exciting installment of Things You Need to Know.
I don't know how exciting it is to, discuss things like, the law. Most people find that kind of boring and, hidebound and,
Fine. Okay, so it's more like Camarilla Law 101 college night class or something. I understand it's not the most exciting thing, but, to be fair, you could have some amazing in-game arguments over nitpicky stuff about the laws.
This is true. I mean, the Camarilla loves its traditions, its laws, and there's no better way to pick a fight than to have a philosophical disagreement about the nature of the traditions. Or if you want to really screw somebody over, you find a loophole that you can just kind of dig into and trap them into it.
Absolutely. And if, dear listeners, you haven't picked it up by now, this podcast, we're going to be discussing the law or traditions of the Camarilla.
Yes. So there's only 6 of these suckers. Which you think, wow, six laws. How in the world can you possibly mess that up? But the problem is these laws are really ambiguous in their interpretation. And so this has led to many arguments and many disagreements and many entrapments of many enemies. So it's good to know how to work the system. A good Camarilla vampire is one who knows how to find the best loopholes. It's, you just kind of have to be a little bit of a lawyer about these things.
You know what? I got to say, Jen, these were set down in the 15th century?
Well, kind of. The traditions actually have a really kind of long history. They're not born out of complete thin air. It wasn't like the 15th century, the founders of the Camarilla sat around and said, it'd be really great. Let's have some traditions. They're called traditions because they have deep roots in vampire history. And they come from years and years and years, some say thousands of years of legacy and understanding how to survive in the world as vampires. So legend says that these laws were originally handed down from Cain, the first vampire. But again, you have to believe that Cain existed to believe that legend. So it's probably far more likely that these were just grown out of vampiric society as it evolved, and as vampires discovered they need to have parameters and boundaries for their survival, these traditions kind of grew up in these little broods and familial groups and clans to help ensure that they can make it through a night.
Right. If it's one thing that I've learned from history, and I'm sure you have too, is that the fastest way get a group of people on board with something is to say that, some god decreed it.
Yes, if God said so, the 10 Commandments, or ancient king said so, Hammurabi's laws. There's a weight that comes with this idea of tradition and legacy, and so that's what is at the heart of the Camarilla law. It's the fact that by tying it back to this ancient past, you're saying, but this is the way it has been and the way it should be and the way it will always be. It creates this concept of legacy, of continuity, and it's sort of a little like the priesthood in the Catholic Church. It's the fact that I get my authority from those who came before me. the apostolic authority that has been passed on to me. It's a little like apostolic succession. It's that idea that authority has been passed on to me because it has always been, and it always will be, this is the way that vampire society works.
Right. And with something like the Camarilla and its founding, we've already discussed that elders are sort of at the pinnacle of this sect of the Camarilla. And they like nothing more than for things to stay as they are. They understand that time marches on, so that's what you have childer for. But the more that to the traditions we can hold true, the better.
And as the Camarilla was being formed in the Middle Ages, that mindset really took hold, especially because you got to remember at the same time this is going on, there's the anarch revolts where all the youngsters, them kids, they're out there and they're listening to their loud music and driving their fast cars. And, the Camarillas they have utterly no regard for our history and our traditions and where we've come from. So for them, the traditions become a real backbone and a defining element of what it means to be a vampire and what it means to live in polite society, in cultured society for vampires.
Oh, absolutely. There's no better way to draw that line in the sand of us versus them. We are the civilized kindred. We usher in the golden ages of humanity. We shepherd the herd, if you will. And those guys over there, they're just rebel rousers. You don't want to be a part of them, do you?
Them folk.
Those people.
Those kids.
Those upstarts. I'll get you. In my day, we didn't have this fancy stuff called a telephone. We had telepathy, and we liked it.
You guys don't know how good you got it.
That's right. Oh, that's it. My next character is going to be some curmudgeon-y old has-been.
I had to go hunt in the snow uphill both ways.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, kids nowadays, you just call up that Uber and bam, it's like a Happy Meal delivery.
You guys have it so easy.
So easy. All right, so we got it down to the what is it? The traditions. There's a reason for the protocol and all the pomp that the Camarilla has. The rituals involved, social rituals especially, because they're sort of a secular group, help enforce the laws of society. The common knowledge that this holds together. Things like status and court officers and presentation. And boons, currency of the realm, if you will. All of these things fit into the framework of and the traditions surround it. These measly 6 traditions, which we're going to discuss, are not as simple as they appear.
Yes. So because the traditions form the framework of the Camarilla, all those things that drive every other sect of vampires crazy about the Camarilla, that's why they exist.
Right.
I mean, to be able to enforce the law, you need to know what the pecking order is, like who's in and who's out. And that's kind of the basic concept of law in the first place. Law is the means by which we define a society and what we hold important. And those who are in our society follow the law. And those who are outside of our society do not follow our law. So all the trappings of the Camarilla, the concept of a prince, the primogen, status, boons, the fact that you have to present yourself to be accepted in the city before you can formally live there, all those are actually pieces that fit into the greater concept of the traditions, because this is how the Camarilla keeps order over the vampires who claim that sect as their home.
Absolutely. Within these laws, also, we're gonna find the consequences for those who disrupt or ignore the laws. The punishment can be quite harsh, even unto final death.
Yeah, a lot of these laws. I mean, the Camarilla takes these dead serious.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. I mean, if you break the traditions, if you breach them in any sort of way, more often than not, you can face an execution squad, and you may be hightailing it out of town ahead of a scourge. That's never a good thing, especially if they catch you, because then you're dead.
Okay, well then without further ado, Jen, why don't you start us off with the first tradition?
So the first of the 6 traditions, the first tradition of the Camarilla is the most important one for the Camarilla. It is the one that they hold absolutely dear, and that is the masquerade. Thou shalt not reveal thy true nature to those not of the blood. Doing such shall renounce thy claims of the blood. In short, that means don't tell other people you're a vampire. Don't do it.
When in discussing the formation, the knights, the dark ages that preceded the formation of the Camarilla, we went into how the Inquisition, the Church, and even rogue hunters knew about the vampires, and we just hunt them down and kill them. So if they think that there are no more vampires, and those are just myth and legends, they are not going to come after us.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta remember, when the Camarilla is founded, this is, like you said, straight up in the burning times. Vampires weren't the world's greatest secret. But nowadays, in our modern society, after the Age of Enlightenment, vampires are like, oh, those are the quaint things that you see on those teen dramas. You know, there's no such thing as vampires. Those are really just misunderstood goth kids.
That's right. Such shows as the Kindred journals or the original Peoples.
The original Peoples.
The original Peoples. I got nothing on that one.
Oh, my Lord.
Oh, yeah.
Kindred journals? Really?
Kindred journal. Well, you know, figure it out.
So, yeah, nowadays, vampires are part of pop culture in a weird way that you can kind of hide in plain sight, but you still have to hide. The biggest and greatest fear that the Camarilla has is that the true nature of vampires, that they really do exist, will get out. Right.
This is all due to the fact that when the Camarilla was formed and they decided to influence humanity, all of those centuries of gaining that influence and guiding humanity led to their ability to be the ultimate spin doctors. They use the media, they use the entertainment to sort of give that misdirection. And even since, you know, the movable press, you know, printing press, it's like ever since then, bam, they were right there.
Yeah, Camarilla Kindred figured out very quickly, you know, the best way to obfuscate your presence is to control the information, and you create the story. It's not unlike what a White House press secretary does. It is, the Camarilla excels at taking a hold of a situation and spinning it in such a way that people can go, oh yeah, okay. You know, oh, there were vampires running around in the park last night. Oh, wait, that was obviously a film shoot. Or, I was at a club and I think I saw somebody like literally drinking blood out of another person's neck. Oh, wow. Mentioned that's just those goth kids up to their like weird freaky blood play or whatever. It's this idea of you hide the story with a believable enough lie that it somehow makes it all okay in the hopes that no one catches on to the fact that it's all true.
And also the idea that the Kindred have become, in dealing with humans, they have learned a lot of great ways to fake being human.
Kindred have learned how to create fake identities to protect their true identity. And this is very important, especially for anyone who's high profile or anyone who's particularly old, because people will catch on after a while if you don't age or if you look the same or, you know, wow, isn't it interesting that Joe has appeared in like 3 different centuries? That's kind of weird.
Right. So no photo albums, kids.
So no photo albums. So they're very careful about their identities. They're also very careful about their movement in public because little things will tip humans off that you aren't quite normal. The fact that you don't have body heat. or that you don't breathe, or you don't eat, or a lot of these things can be problematic when you're dealing with humans on a night-to-night basis. So many Kindred have learned little tricks and tips they use to kind of fool humans, like holding a hot drink or cultivating the ability to eat food. Things like this, it help them mimic enough of their old human behaviors so they don't tip people off that they're different.
Right. And then on the other side of that, there are those Kindred that if you haven't developed, the ability to remember to blink or breathe, or you don't like hot beverages, they've also developed skills and disciplines to help them hide, just hide altogether. This is especially true for the clan called the Nosferatu, that are just so hideous based on the blood curse for whatever reason, because nobody really knows why, that they have developed the ability to become invisible or even appear not so ugly through the power we've called that they call obfuscate.
Yeah, so a lot of vampires have special powers like obfuscate, quietus, that is another nifty power that you can kind of hide some of your movements, like the sounds. So, I mean, these are all ways that vampires can use to hide themselves and their movements around humans and around each other. Don't be fooled. They use it on each other, too. This is, especially for the Nosferatu, because they are so glaringly different that they have to be able to hide themselves. Because if they didn't, then humans would catch on, wow, there's that creepy looking like weirdo hiding in the alley again. If they didn't, they could be hunted down and killed. So
right, the movie excuse only goes so far.
You're right. The movie excuse only goes so far. And you gotta remember, it doesn't work in every area. Like Los Angeles, where we live, movie excuse will go all night long because there's always filming. I can't swing a dead cat and not hit a film crew. But say Chicago would be more problematic, or Miami, or some of these other places where it's not necessarily common to have a film crew just setting up shop. So you have to think of some other good excuses. Definitely certain disciplines help out a great deal in areas where an easy excuse is not something you can just whip out of your pocket.
Right. And this is also, as a player, I think this would be something that would be very interesting to keep in mind in dealing with, because in some games you will come across mortals, and you can either play it off as in, these are tricks my sire taught me, or this is what the court demands of me, or if you're caitiff, or if you didn't have a sire, these are things that you've learned through experience, and how does that affect your play of that character?
Everyone's going to have different ways that they try to hide from humanity. I think the bigger, more interesting problem is much more when you have situations where humanity, it just became glaringly obvious for one reason or the other. And then you have to figure out, how do I keep a lid on this? This is where the White House press secretary analogy comes in. Because you're like, oh crap, I have to hide the fact that I was just throwing fireballs from my fingertips from humanity, and how does that one work? So some of the fun of the game actually is when you are trying so hard to keep this particular tradition, because so many bad things can go wrong. Absolutely.
Oh man, the sky's the limit when it comes to, a bad night.
So one of the things about this first tradition and the Camarilla is because the Camarilla Kindred are trying so very hard to keep this masquerade, they are more humane vampires. And this is less a state of being and much more a chosen set of ethics. They choose to act and respond as humans would to the world around them. Their moral compass tends to be the same as any other human's moral compass. So you get upset at the same things other humans would as a vampire. they tend to get more upset about like things like murder or abuse or the slaughter of innocents, because that's what humans do. But you're not human, and I can't stress that enough. As a vampire, you're not human. So, and this becomes much more apparent the older a kindred is, because as more centuries pass, as you've survived the games that kindred play with one another, as you've had to do more and more cutthroat things to try and make it through another night, you become more jaded and you become less and less humane. So vampires with a high humanity they tend to look more human. It's hard to tell a very humane vampire from a human unless you know what to look for. But those vampires who are less humane look decidedly less human. And so the lower your humanity, the more alien and weird and not right you look.
Right, and that is definitely something, again, to keep in mind, is that it's easy. It's easy to play, like the first 50-year vampire, new embracee, neonator, and Scylla, because it's still your reactions as a human, hopefully.
It's all shiny.
It's all shiny and new. Would be your reactions as the vampire, as the kindred. A real challenge comes into when you start getting older, when you cross that century mark, because anachronisms creep in. And all sorts of delicious little tidbits of how do I have horror at this shiny thing this person's talking into, this casting light on its face. Oh, but where's my quill?
Yeah, or even worse, after a century of living as a vampire, you've had to do some pretty heinous stuff.
Oh, that's right, because you have the whole thing about what's old is new again is old again. You've got the whole. In my day, I may have hiked uphill to feed in the 4 miles in the snow because the school was on the other side, and that's the only place I had to feed.
Exactly.
Whereas here, that doesn't fly.
Yeah, that doesn't fly. Yeah, your humanity is going to be affected by things like your age, by your experience, by the time period you were created in, by just the general wear and tear of vampiric existence. And so the older you are, the harder it is for you to fake being normal human.
Well, also with this tradition comes the added word of those not of the blood. This is where the vagaries come in that we spoke of.
Yes, it seems fairly straightforward. But then you find out it's actually really convoluted and really complex.
Right, because who's not of the blood? Does that mean does that mean other vampires? So what, you can't have ghouls?
Well, what do you mean by reveal? Like...
Right, yeah, exactly, if they already know.
What if they already know? You didn't tell them. They just came up and said, like, hey, a vampire, what up? And you're like, who's the vampire? I don't know any vampires.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
I mean, what do you do? I mean, this is particularly a problem with other supernaturals who are not vampires. So creatures like werewolves or mages. Mages are the big problem with this one, because mages have absolutely no problem going up to a single vampire and saying, yo, vampire, what up? What are you doing in my territory? And you're like, vampire? Who's a vampire? I don't know any vampires. But they clearly have pinpointed you. And it's sort of like, well, shit, what do I do now? This is a problem with this law, because we don't know what not of the blood means. Does it mean people who are humans but not supernaturals? Does it mean all mortals, including supernatural ones? Does it mean all critters out in the world everywhere? Does it mean non-Camarilla vampires? I mean, it gets pretty hairy when you start slicing hairs here. Like, what do you mean by that? And what about revealing? What if they just know who you are? You didn't do anything, but they've just figured it out. Then what do you do?
Right, and then you have, like you said before about other vampires, you have two whole sects, the Sabbat and the Anarchs, that don't recognize the traditions at all. They may have their own version of a masquerade, but that's only self-preservation. They don't care about your rules. So what if you go into a city, or what if you share a city, and they do something, and you're like, oh crap, there's like a whole bunch of people with fangs on the 10 o'clock news, and they're not us.
Yeah, what do you do then? There's a Sabbat pack running willy-nilly through Disneyland. And you're like, well, shit. Not your group, not your people, but now they've revealed the existence of the blood to everybody else. So now what do you do?
What you do is you pray you've got Ventru with some influence.
That's what you pray. You pray hard for that.
Pray hard for that. But I wonder, Jen, if that part of it, though, does that come down to sort of like what we've said, the prince is the ultimate law keeper. Is it due to their interpretation?
A lot of times it kind of really does kind of fall down on the prince and how they choose to interpret it. And you'll find that with almost all these laws, because, as you said, the prince is the ultimate arbitrator of any law in the domain. So if you get a prince who's a little bit more conservative, then they would say that the idea of those not of the blood would pretty much mean anyone who wasn't a vampire. But if you get one who's a little bit more liberal, they may say, you know what, ghouls are okay. Telling a ghoul, having them know about it is all right, because you have that's a human that's bound to you. Again, there's a lot of gray area here. More often than not, you have to just rely on the prince's interpretation of the law.
Well, that's great. I mean, how does that help? Again, this all comes down to like the juiciness of these kind of questions. Is you go from say you're in Los Angeles, and yeah, the movie thing works great, and my obfuscate's wee, and I'm in Nosferatu, but I've got to go to Miami. What do? I don't know that prince very well. I go to introduce myself, and suddenly, they turn out to be some kind of staunch ex-Catholic person that takes a very strict interpretation. Yeah.
That's sort of the dice of being a kindred.
Right.
You play by the prince's rules, and however a prince interprets it, it's the way that you have to live in their domain. It's not unlike being a Baptist. Go with my analogy here.
Okay.
So, and John can only laugh at this because he too grew up Baptist. It is the joke with being a Baptist is that if you're a Baptist on a desert island, you have to build two churches. One of them is the one you don't go to, because no two churches are ever going to be alike, and they'll always have their interpretations.
That's right.
That church over there, they do communion every 4 months, but that church over there does it the first Sunday of every month, and who's absolutely right on that one? It really falls down to you got to go with the church you're in at the moment. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. So just the same way with Camarilla law. When you're in a city, you do as the prince says. So if a prince has a very conservative interpretation of the first tradition, you go with that one. And if a prince has a more lenient one, you go with that one.
Absolutely. Because, yeah, you've got, like you said, when in Rome, perfect analogy. You are embraced Camarilla, you signed on board, you were acknowledged. This is what you signed up for. You put your name on the dotted line, so deal with it. If your sire or somebody or coterie sends you or takes you to another city, yeah, you suck it up and you do what that prince, how they run things.
Yeah, it's not a perfect system, and therein lies a lot of tension for most Kindred and most Camarilla courts, because you have to figure out how to abide by a prince's interpretation, even if you don't agree with it.
Right. And this is a great segue into the second tradition of domain, which is typically where the prince reigns. And I'll take this one.
Go for it.
Thy domain is thine own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word while they are in thy domain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I say goes, motherfucker.
Yep. I rule this bitch. And you all listen to what I gotta say. Yeah, the idea of domain is extremely important to Kindred. And to vampires in general. I mean, I think across vampiric society, this idea of domain resonates because at their heart, vampires are predators. They're predatory creatures. And just like any other predator, they like their hunting grounds and they protect it jealously. And because of that, domain is a very ancient idea. It goes all the way back to a time when a vampire may control a whole big territory on their own. And they only allow themselves and their childer to feed in that area. So no one else is allowed because resources are limited. And resources have to go to me and mine first. And maybe if I like you, you might get a piece. But most of the time, you're not going to be allowed. In modern nights, feeding's a lot easier for vampires. So the modern city is a perfect cover for vampires to feed in. They have more than enough resources for a lot of vampires. And the Camarilla, though, still believes in the idea of singular rulership of one domain. So one dominant vampire who controls the power of the city, and all other vampires who live in that domain have to respect that vampire's right to rule over whatever they claim as their domain.
Right. And then because of that, the dominant, as you said before, in the Camarilla, the dominant vampire is often the prince, and the domain is an area of the city that they claim. But some domains may have smaller cities within them. Again, take Los Angeles, for example. Los Angeles County is pretty darn big.
Yeah. So, Los Angeles is ridiculously huge. And the entire Los Angeles metro area is actually made up of several smaller cities. I mean, in theory, LA alone is the size of some small states or even countries. So it's a huge city. So to be a prince of Los Angeles is to claim a ginormous domain. So, in theory, you could have a couple of princes in one city. Say, the prince of Los Angeles only claims Los Angeles city proper within LA County, while there's like a separate prince of Pasadena in the San Gabriel Valley, because those are all separate cities from Los Angeles city proper. So you can have a domain broken up like that. And that's actually not uncommon in some larger megacities where there's just so many people and so many vampires. You can have more than one prince controlling an area. But then you get smaller cities. So, like Kansas City. And I use Kansas City as an example because I'm from that area. Kansas City is itself a good-sized city, but it's not a huge city. But it's kind of the regional hub for a rural area around it of small towns and mid-sized cities that all kind of feed into the larger city of Kansas City. So a prince could say, I claim not only Kansas City, but all the towns around it and that entire region is going to be mine. And I will have like little petty princes or little vampires I trust who might control one or two things, and they all answer to me. And this is all my domain. And in theory, they can do that.
Right. That's definitely something that I think is very interesting about domain is, like you said, with Kansas City or in places like Paris, it is the hub of all the little provinces around it.
Yeah. Paris is in particular interesting. So places like Paris or London or even Boston. Boston is an old enough city in America. because these cities have a history that goes back to a time before their countries were more populated, like London, the Prince of London could pretty much claim like control over most of England. The Prince of Paris claimed rulership over nearly all of France because they were princes in those cities at a time when they were the hub of these nation states. And so it's kind of interesting in like London or Paris or even Boston, which is a regional hub like that, because the Camarilla has been there so long, the culture of the court and the concept of domain has spread over a large regional area because it kind of had to.
And because there are no set rules of a domain, it's only that if one vampire stakes a claim and everybody else backs that vampire or says, yeah, Prince, we're with you. You rule this domain, then this law protects that.
Exactly. While you are in that particular prince's domain, you owe them the respect and have to obey the edicts that they put forth. I mean, and this particular law protects their right to do that and forces you to have to obey them. If you don't, you run the risk of having the second tradition thrown in your face and the prince coming down on you with the full weight of their authority.
Absolutely. And you should be, if that ever happened, be lucky. You are lucky if it's just the sheriff escorting you to the border.
Yeah, you get a particularly like petty or righteously angry prince, and they could just kill you on the spot.
Absolutely. And this tradition goes back to, as Jen talked about before, the feudal structure of the Camarilla. This is one of those things like a baron, lording over the land with their serfs, not to put too fine a point on it. It's really straightforward that the prince's word is law. And this is, it's established in the ideas of the elders. We've been around, we've seen it all, we've done it all. You listen to us because we rule you. Yeah,
it's really hard. It's very difficult to go against a sitting prince. If there is a prince in power, it's really hard to stand against them. The only people who ever try it are those who are supremely confident in their ability to stand against that prince, or they wouldn't dare try it, because if they don't succeed, it means your death.
Right, exactly. Again, these traditions are the best known way that the Camarilla has devised to maintain control and order among this group of, as you said before, predators, of killers.
Yeah, they're cut. These are vampires. They're pretty cutthroat.
Right.
So, you don't really want to be that one person who upsets the status quo unless you have the cojones to do it. If you have the cojones to succeed, then, you might be able to do it. And maybe you can get to be the new prince. That's a lot. You have to have a lot of things working just right to be able to succeed at that.
Absolutely. You got to make sure everybody's trying to back your play, or else you are hung out to dry.
Yep. So the domain in the Camarilla is basically, it's what the prince can do with it whatever they wish. If they claim it, it's theirs. They can do whatever they want. If they desire to grant hunting rights within the domain to certain groups or people as a reward, they can do that. But it should be clear in giving hunting rights to people, they're not ceding domain. You don't get to have control over that area. You just get to go feed there, but you're not the head honcho. That's still the prince's. In some small cases, a kindred can be given the right of domain within their territory. This often is a reward to a particular vampire, like, hey, you did good by me, or you did good for the court, or I want to shut you up from blackmailing me. Here, I'm going to give you this 5 square block area that will be your private domain. And in that private domain, it's your territory. You can do what you want. You can protect it however you will. You can let whoever you want in there. That's your private domain. But it's usually just a very small portion that they give, and it's very rare. It's a big prize for a prince to give up any part of their domain.
Absolutely. And like you said before about the hush money, if you will, it's also a fantastic way to keep your enemies closer.
Yeah, it is. It's like, hey, that person, I fear they might be trying to challenge my domain, but here, let me give you this fabulous gift of this one neighborhood that's your private domain. You get to do with it what you want. Have a nice night.
And that is definitely choice, because you're like, oh, I have my own little tiny kingdom. Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah. I mean, that is worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely.
But again, it's very rare. Most princes will not want to cede any part of their domain to anybody.
All right, tradition number 3.
So the third tradition is that of progeny. Thou shalt not sire another without the permission of thine elder. If thou creates another without thine elder's leave, both thou and thy progeny shall be slain.
Oh, this is like one of the first traditions that we've come across that specifically says, if you do this without permission, you and your child will be killed.
I think my dad used to tell that to any boy who would come to the door on a date for me. It was like, you will not be siring another without the permission of thine elder. Or you will be slain. This is the same conversation they had.
It's got to be. This is where they got it from. It was, some medieval father and their daughter, having this conversation.
Dad!
So in short, this means that if you make another vampire without getting permission to do so, you're both dead. And this is very important because resources. You have to keep the numbers low just because it's just good business.
Yeah, too many vampires in a domain could mean too much notice by humans. If you don't have enough resources, that means people are fighting for resources. If you don't have enough humans to feed on, that means people are fighting for humans, and they'll pick up on this. So population control is rather key for vampires. It's one thing for a prince to say yes or no to someone coming into their domain. That's one way they can keep population kind of on the low side. But the other way is they can just keep control of who gets to make new vampires. You don't want your population to get so high it becomes unmanageable. Right.
And this is also another good example of the vagueness of the tradition or the law, because who exactly is your elder?
Oh, yeah. It doesn't say. It's like your elder without the permission of thine elder. Well, going back to my dating analogy, my father would have been like, I'm totally your elder. I made you, I put you in this world, I can take you out again. So in that sense, some would argue that your elder is your sire.
But we've already heard that people consider the prince to be the eldest.
Yes. So oftentimes the prince is considered by courtesy to be the eldest in a city. And that's not always necessarily strictly true. I mean, a prince could be younger than some vampires, but it's a courtesy. They are considered the eldest. And then there's elders, actual true elders who are parts of clans. You may have elders who aren't the prince, who aren't even the primogen, but they live in the city and they have influence over the clan. So are they the elder you have to get permission from? Or is it your primogen? Is it your sire? Is it the prince? What? Again, it's this fuzzy loophole that you kind of have to negotiate. So most Camarilla scholars, Camarilla law scholars, and frankly most princes tend to lean on the more conservative interpretation, which would be that the elder of any city is the prince, and you cannot embrace without the permission of the prince, which makes a lot of sense because the prince is the one who's trying to keep control and a cap on how many vampires are in the city. Other more historically minded people might say, well, before there were Camarilla princes, the elders were your own elders. So oftentimes, as a courtesy, it might be a situation where you have to ask the prince for permission to embrace, but you also have to clear it through your primogen or your clan elder or however your clan is structured. So you may have to get a couple of people's permission. The prince may give permission for a clan to embrace, like Clan Toreador. I give you permission to embrace 2 vampires. And the elder of the clan is the one who gets to choose which 2 Toreador gets to make new vampires. So
right, this sort of doling out of that permission, or even the act of asking permission, is one of those wonderful little things that is rampant in the Camarilla. A power play.
It is a power play.
It is a way that you can either curry favor because this is what you want to get, or the prince can dole it out and then say, all right, I like your clan. Like you said, your sire or your elder is now the one going to determine who can do it, or if you can or can't do it. Now the power lies with them. It's just a lot of back and forth.
Yeah. And part of this is because New Child are power. The more people you have loyal to you and your cause, the more power you have. So Prince is going to be very careful who he or she gives the right of embrace to. And they're going to be very careful in how they play that. So part of that power play is not just, who's giving the authority for making the childer. It's which people do I give the right to do it?
Absolutely. Like, I know in our beginning of our game with Pillars of Salt, to say that the Tremere wanted to embrace someone, well, the Ventru Prince might have something to say about that.
Yeah, but then when the Tremere came into power, they could embrace whoever they wanted.
Oops. Power base.
Oops. Power play. That changed. The rite of embrace is a really nifty way for a prince to build up a block of power. Like, if I want to get that clan's favor, if I want them on my side, I'll let them have a rite of embrace. Hey, there's this clan that doesn't have a lot of numbers, but they'll completely back and support me if I give them the ability to embrace. By golly, guess what? You're going to go be making some babies. So the embrace is actually a very powerful bargaining chip amongst vampires.
We've talked about if you embrace without permission, you can face stiff punishment, even death. What would be something that, like, say you have a lenient prince, but you still did it without permission? What would happen to you?
Well, if you have a lenient prince and you still did it without permission, I mean, chances are your child could be removed from you, and the raising and training of that child could be given to someone else, which that removes a powerful asset from you.
Oh.
Your child could be bound to somebody else, blood bound to somebody else, which is even worse, because not only are they removed from you, but now someone else can control them. You yourself can owe boons. You can be blood bound. You can any number of things can happen to you. It depends on the prince, really. A lot of these punishments really come down on the prince. Final death is not necessarily the final punishment on any of these particular traditions. A lot of it is circumstantial. I know in my real life job, I work for a university, and one of my jobs is I have to handle situations where an undergraduate student is cheated or plagiarized. And so when I send them the letter usually is very ominous. It says, because you cheated on this test, you could face punishment up to and including suspension or dismissal. And so immediately the phone starts ringing, and people are like, oh my gosh, does this mean I'm getting kicked out of school? No, it just means that you could be if it was bad enough. And it's the same way with the traditions. I mean, if you go and you have a lenient prince and you went and embraced a child, they could say, you know what, not cool. We won't kill you, but we'll take the child away. You're going to owe us a life boon, and you're going to have to eat shit for a year. But at least you're alive. Or if you get a really strict prince, they're going to say, I'm sorry, did you go making someone without my permission? Well, guess what? Life for life. Now yours is forfeit. You could have your child killed, actually. And that has happened on more than one occasion where a prince will say, okay, well, you didn't get the embrace with my permission. You can live, but your child's killed. There's a lot of different responses to an illegal embrace. Here's the funny thing with an illegal embrace. There's a stigma attached to it. If you did not get the prince's permission, and let's just say that the prince let all parties survive, then the child has the stigma of being an illegal embrace. The sire has the stigma of having illegally embraced someone. And you probably both owe up the wazoo to somebody, usually the prince. And so there's a sort of social stigmatization that goes on there because everybody knows, oh, you didn't come around the right way. Oh, something's not socially cool with you.
In a system of quid pro quo, status quo, and respect, it's definitely questionable if your motives, it does stick with you, like you said.
Yeah, and you have to overcome that stigma, especially the chilled. It's worse on the chilled in many ways because then if they were embraced by someone and their sire tried to hide it, they may not have had proper education. So a lot of people look down on them as being like, you don't know the true ways of our polite society. If the sire didn't try to hide it, then people are like, oh, well, you're the reason that Clan Ventru got in so much trouble because, your sire couldn't keep it in his pants. There's a stigma to not having gone through the proper channels to be embraced.
And this will bring us to the fourth tradition because I'm noticing a pattern here, Jen, that these definitely follow an order of events, if you will, within a society.
If this, then that.
Exactly. Yeah. The fourth tradition being accounting, which states, those thou create are thine own children. Until thy progeny shall be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Their sins are thine to endure.
Boy, that sounds very biblical.
Doesn't it, though? Yeah, that essentially means, like you said, if you have that stigma and the child has to endure it, so do you. Because you brought him into this unlife. Guess what? You're accountable.
Yes. So this is the side effect of being able to create a child. If you are able to create childer, then you now have to take care of that childer, and you have to make sure it doesn't do something stupid. It's very much, you have to raise that childer, you have to feed that childer, and if they screw up, then you have to kill that childer. That's the way this works. So much like in the creation of a child, the fourth tradition has an eye to the masquerade. New vampires, basically, you're just walking fuck-ups. You're still trying to figure all this out. Most of the time, new vampires, they have no idea. Before they were embraced, they had no idea this world existed. And then they're thrown into it. And they're still trying to negotiate between their old life as a human and their new life as a vampire. And none of them know any of the intricacies of the Kindred society. I mean, a lot of these creatures have lived for decades or centuries or longer. And so there's a lot of unspoken pitfalls for the new Kindred, and they're bound to screw up. I mean, it's going to happen. You just have to accept it's going to happen.
This also goes back to the idea of a power play. If the prince or the eldest grant you the ability to sire a child or chilled, they understand this law of accounting. They know that it could go both ways. Like somehow say that you can embrace and you sire a new vampire and you bring them in and you do a great job. That looks really good for you. And that makes the person that gave you that permission look really good.
Yeah.
So, but there's also the flip side.
There's the flip side. Your child is an absolute, screw up. And that looks bad on you. Like, wow, we gave you this permission. We granted you this ability. And that's what you chose?
That's right. It gives the person that granted you the permission the power over you to kind of be like, well, guess what? you kind of messed that one up, so you owe me.
Mm-hmm. And, oh, by the way, you have to go clean up their mess.
Right.
They just piddled on the floor again.
That's right.
Go clean up their mess.
Take the water bottle. Just spray them. Just spritz them whenever they're going to mess up.
Just stop that. Just no. So, yeah, because fledglings, they're kind of a mess up. Most fledglings are in this weird limbo state in the Camarilla. They don't really have any status. They're really, frankly, just not allowed out yet. It's like toddlers. You can't leave them alone for 5 seconds because if they go too quiet, they're obviously in flour and it's all over the house. They're eating dog food. They're running naked. This is kind of the mindset most elder vampires have about fledglings. They treat them pretty much like a cross between a toddler and a dog. They're just not out in polite kindred society yet.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And, for the most part, that's a good thing because there has to be a time period for the sire to train them, to educate them, at least to the best of their abilities up to a point. I mean, if, like I said, if they're really good, it's no problem. Sometimes you could even use this as a way to sort of curry favor with another, like saying, hey, Mr. Toreador, you're really good at this kind of thing. I'll give you a little boon if you help me out. Which, of course, if they help you out, that means that you could find a way that they have to help you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to play this. But again, as a player, if your child is also another player, it sets up just some crazy dynamics that could just make for an interesting game.
Yeah, if you're the child of another player, there's a lot of weird crazy that can go on, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, it really is. But especially because you have to realize that a fledgling, before they're given any status, they have none, and so they can't talk to any other vampires who have any rank in the domain. They have no rights. So you're completely dependent on your sire until such time as they release you. And again, this leads to some crazy power dynamics and some interesting role playing
and then, I guess the culmination would be when you are released. I mean, do they have a ceremony for that or something? Or do you just say, my prince, they are done? I mean, how does that happen?
It depends on the clan. It depends on the domain. Some clan, on a lot of levels, it's on a clan level. Some clans have really formal, almost like debutante balls, right? For a new release. Ventrue tends to be really big on that. Other clans are like, well, if you survive a year and a day, I guess I can bring you to court. Gangrel are notorious for the fact that they will embrace childer and leave them for a year and see if they live. If they survive, well, okay, maybe I'll bring you to court. So it's really kind of dependent on the clan on how they handle it. And it's also dependent on the prince. Most princes will expect that there's a formal presentation of a new child in their presence. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it's basically the sire presenting the child to the prince and saying, I have now released them. Could you grant them status within kindred society? That's a formality that's actually tied into the prince's right of domain. Because the prince could very easily say, no, I don't believe they're ready yet. And they have to remain under your care until I give them status. Yeah, it's really just kind of a clan culture as to how fancy their release is. I know Ventrue are very much into those debutante balls.
Well, why wouldn't they be?
I've never had a debutante ball. I was never a deb.
Oh, you'll always be a deb to me, Jen.
Aww. I wouldn't want to be, because, you have to buy a fancy dress and wear gloves and not spill things on yourself. I would be a mess.
Nah, you're right. Let's just grab a bottle of whiskey and go out back.
That's much more my style.
There you go. There. Now you have status. There you go.
There you go. So, yeah. Before you're released as a fledgling, basically, you have to keep your nose clean. You can't do anything stupid. You can't break any laws or endanger the masquerade or any of that stuff, because anything you do bad will come back and reflect on your sire. And so usually most sires are pretty strict on it, because they know that if their child's a screw up, it comes back on them. It's not just the child who gets punished, it's them too. Once that fledgling's released and has status, then it's a little different, because then they're held accountable all on their own. But until that point, the sire is the one that's held accountable as well.
Now we have tradition number 5.
5th tradition, and that is hospitality. Yes, it is not just a thing for Game of Thrones. It's honor one another's domain. When thou comes to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself to the one who ruleth there. Without the word of acceptance, thou art nothing. So this is a tradition that is tied intimately with the 2nd tradition. The prince has the right of domain on any city, and you have to honor that domain. If you are coming from another place, coming to a new prince's domain, you have to present yourself to the prince and say, hello, my name is, and I'm here for, and may I be here, please? Without the prince saying yes and giving the thumbs up, you have no right to be there. Absolutely none. They could have the scourge hunt you down. You have no rights in that domain.
Right. And also, because it's tied so closely to the 2nd tradition, this actually is also meant to help you in society, help the kindred of society, because in presenting yourself to the prince, you get to know how they run things.
Yeah. Because every prince is different, and every prince is going to interpret the laws slightly differently. You get to know the prince, you get to know the court, you get to know what you're walking into.
Sure. So this gives you, under the law, you are essentially forced to show deference and respect to the prince. But, again, it also helps you out in the end. But yeah, I mean, all of these traditions are very important in the ways of keeping polite society within the Camarilla.
So most often the protocol is that before you enter into a prince's domain, you would send word ahead. So either to the primogenitor of your clan in the city, maybe you know someone in the city who is pretty high ranking or has some status, or maybe you know a court officer, or someone knows a court officer. Basically, you get word to the prince ahead of time that I'm going to be coming into your domain. Would that be all right? Can I make arrangements to be formally recognized or acknowledged by you in the domain? And please don't kill me once I cross the border. So basically the polite thing to do is to send word ahead. Usually most princes, there are a few exceptions, but most princes will be, if you've sent word ahead, and if you report to the primogenitor of your clan in the city, then they'll accept that for a time being until they can do any formal acknowledgments. And the primogenitor is usually the one who's held to be responsible for you. So if you do anything in the city before that time, it's on the primogenitor's head that, hey, you let this shady character into my domain. Yeah, you have no formal status in the domain until you're formally accepted in the city by the prince.
Right. Now, I have a question. What if you're just sort of passing through?
Well, that's a little bit more gray, because it depends on who you are, and it depends on what status you carry in the Camarilla as to whether you'll be detained or if you'll even be killed. So you can, in theory, come into a domain and not announce yourself. And if you manage not to be hunted down by the sheriff, or, basically the prince would probably demand a boon of the primogenitor of your clan. And in exchange for said boon, the prince may let you stay if you can make an argument. So if you get caught, or if you trespass on the domain, if you get caught and no one's willing to vouch for you, your life's usually forfeit.
Right, there we are again with the sticky wicket of final death.
Exactly. It's like if you can manage to fly under the radar, and if you can manage to get someone to pony up a big fat boon for you. The prince may be willing to overlook the fact that you weren't polite enough to send a letter ahead. If you do get caught, and if you can't find someone to vouch for you, then, you'll probably end up dead.
Now, you said there are some of those people that can sort of come in and out without the need for that. Who might those be?
So there are some Camarilla title holders on a larger global scale who can come in and out of domains as they please without even announcing themselves to a prince. And those are usually Justicars and Archons. They can supersede a prince's domain. And part of that is because of the nature of their work. They're often traveling. They're often doing things on behalf of the inner circle. So they can be all over the world at any particular time. And it's really tedious to have to ask permission to go into every Camarilla domain just to do your job. So if you're a Justicar, if you're an Archon, usually you get a pass. 9 times out of 10, they will not tell a prince that they're there. They may or may not inform the prince, after the fact, because it's not in it's not in their best interest to tell the prince, especially if they're investigating the prince.
Right? Yeah. That does happen sometimes.
Oh, shit, son.
Oh no.
And there's also a little bit of a tricky thing with, how we mentioned earlier that sometimes the prince will give domain to individuals as a kind of gift. This law applies to those domains as well. So if the prince gives you, say, a small portion of the city, say the Prince of Los Angeles gave me Monrovia, California, which is where I live, so you can all come find me now. But it gave me Monrovia, California. Then let's just say that another vampire, even a Camarilla vampire, comes wandering into Monrovia without my permission. I am well within my rights to kill that vampire because of this law.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Now, the prince may not be happy with it. It could have political ramifications. But in theory, the law's on my side on this one.
Okay, so the short of it is it is best for you before you enter a city or someone else's domain to send word ahead.
Yeah, it's just the polite thing to do. It keeps everything above board. You don't have to worry about getting jumped the minute you cross the border. Primogen aren't mad at you. Court officers aren't hunting you down. It just makes life easier for everybody all the way around.
See, so it's the helpful tradition.
It's a helpful tradition. This is how you don't die. Don't be a dick. Send a note.
That's right. Oh, but speaking of dying.
Uh-oh.
The 6th and final tradition, the tradition of destruction.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay. I'll try to really put something on this one.
Ooh.
Thou art forbidden to destroy another of thy kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder. Only the eldest among thee shall call the blood hunt.
Wow, that was way ominous. That was like Haunted Mansion ominous.
Hey, it is the right of destruction.
Whew. And believe me, the Camarilla takes that right very seriously. Very seriously. The right of destruction is a highly protected right. And it is perhaps on this more than anything else other than the masquerade the Kindred society hinges on. Because the fact that you're a society with laws means that you have some sort of order, decorum, and recognition of the other person, which doesn't come naturally to vampires. Vampires' natural tendency is to kill and destroy and to take down your enemies. This law is very important because it's far too easy for the monsters of the Camarilla to kill each other. So you have to have this law in place so you aren't just randomly killing each other left, right, and center. The right to kill a vampire is only held in the hands of the elder. But then again, we get into that fuzzy gray area, John.
That's right. Who's the eldest?
Yeah, who's the eldest? Who has that right of destruction? But you can understand very much why this is such an important law to the Camarilla, because random acts of murder within vampire society, I mean, it could lead to bloodshed. It could lead to violence. It leads to the breaking of the masquerade. It imperils all of them. It's a little like living. It would be like living in like Renaissance Italy, blood feuds between rival families in Florence. You know, sure, that was great in Renaissance Florence, but that's not how modern vampires can live. That's why this is so very necessary for them. If they resort to just killing their rivals, then that leads to anarchy, that leads to chaos, that draws the attention of the humans, which could kill all of them. So it's much better for you to try and undermine your rivals, humiliate your rivals, play the long games, the political intrigues, games of social games of status, you know, misinformation, games of cunning, much more profitable for you in the end to make it a more political game than just brute destruction. So the idea of destruction has this kind of ancient roots in this concept of lex talionis, which is translated from the Latin. It really means the law of retaliation. It's more or less the principle of an eye for an eye. Whatever the crime is, the punishment must be equal to it. This cuts down on the escalation aspect between all parties. So you can't just, if I insult you in court, you can't just like lop my head off, because that's not lex talionis. That is not an eye for an eye. It is, if I insult you in court, then you can definitely work to undermine my social standing in court. That's considered fair, but me just, you know, going ya mama in the middle of court doesn't mean you get to like, you know, lop my head off. And that's really what it's at the heart of the Sixth tradition, is that they are trying to keep the escalation down somewhat. So in saying that, there are some crimes that are so egregious that automatically they're just going to call for punishments that are more than just a life boon or social disgrace. And there are just some crimes that only final death will fit. And that's the Sixth tradition gives legal precedent for this in the Camarilla.
Now, does it also, like you mentioned about the lex talionis, does the exercising of lex talionis, is that sort of just like a loose tradition that people just sort of accept within Camarilla society, and destruction is separate from that? Or would this kind of be like a lex talionis would be a subsection of right of destruction? They're very closely tied. The idea of an eye for an eye kind of underscores the entire idea of final destruction, because final destruction is held so closely, it can really only be for specific crimes. So again, the idea of me, you know, insulting you in court is not something that is considered worthy to merit final death. Okay, like such as diablerie. That's something that would definitely be like, oh, that's a no. We can put you to death for that. Diablerie is a big no. That's usually a big final death one, because that's so horrific to Camarilla society that, I mean, no question, they will put you down unless you have a good reason. If you have a sanction to do it, then that will protect you. But people are still going to look at you like funny. They're going to give you some side eye because you just cannibalized another vampire. So diablerie does not sanction, usually is automatic final death. Kinslaying is usually final death. Particularly if it's a child killing a sire. And that has to do with the inherent fear of the elders, that they fear being attacked by the neonates. So kinslaying is usually a big bad no. Often breaches of either the masquerade or domain will automatically lead to final death, because those two are so important to kindred society. If you're challenging a prince's domain, if you are causing massive masquerade breaches, then that's threatening all of society. So
usually you're gone. So, but again, the decision on whether a person lives or dies lies in the hands of usually the prince. If you are a threat to the domain, the prince can just declare your life forfeit and order the scourge to kill you. And there's not a lot you can do about that. So in some ways, it's a good way for it's a good tool for a prince to wield in order to dispatch their political rivals. But you have to be very careful how you play that card. If you do it badly, if you do it poorly, you only breed resentment in the court, and you don't want to do that. But if you can make it look like a political rival is a big enough threat that it warrants final death, then hey, gee, you know what? Off the son of a bitch.
Right. That definitely goes along the lines of, as you said before, with the acceptable eye for an eye kind of thing, like with undermining social status. You can definitely see how a prince could use this to sort of, if they can build the right blocks and set the right things in motion, then bam, you nope, hey, look, that person did this and this, we got to take them out.
Yep. And many a prince has done it. It is not uncommon for princes to do it.
Right.
Remember how I mentioned earlier we kind of bump up against that problem of thine elder? That's still a problem.
Right, because, yeah, everybody assumes or gives deference to the prince as the eldest in the city, but what if they're not?
Yeah. And what do you mean by eldest? Like, is it the eldest of your clan? Is it your sire?
The oldest vampire in the city?
Is it the oldest vampire in the city? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so again, yeah, it's really interesting how something even like the tradition of destruction can be, you can make an argument for it.
Yeah. So in most cities, the tradition is that the eldest is the prince. And whether they are or aren't the eldest actual vampire in the city, they get the right of destruction and no one else does. So that's where the Office of the Scourge comes in, because the Office of the Scourge exists primarily to be the prince's executioner. You are their headsman. You go and kill the people they want dead. This is where a lot of kindred can land in some hot water. Because if a kindred kills another kindred and they aren't the prince, then you didn't get permission from the prince to kill that vampire, then the prince could order your destruction.
Right. Yet another thing that you have to do with permission or else.
Yep.
Right. So beyond this tradition, in its literal interpretation, it says that the eldest holds the right over life or death. But does this mean, what does this mean in terms of clans or sire, broods? Because there's some wiggle room here that, as we talked about before with the tradition of accounting and also just progeny, if you're the sire of a kid that's messing up, you can go to your elder and be like, or primogen, whoever that is, and be like, hey, I got to take this kid out. He's going to make us look bad. You can make a really good argument for your destruction of your childer.
Yes, you can. And in fact, there's many a sire who has done it. And this is one of those like weird gray area wiggle rooms. Because this tradition is worded the way it is, a sire can make the argument. I put my child down because I held the right of life and death over them. And if they're a fledgling who hasn't been acknowledged in the court, most princes aren't going to make a big deal out of it. I mean, they're just, especially if it's a child who is problematic, a prince would rather a sire just take care of the whole problem before it becomes a bigger issue than to give them acknowledgement and then have it become this whole other thing. So a lot of times a prince won't necessarily say anything if a sire's taking out a fledgling. It becomes a little bit trickier when a fledgling has actual like status in the court, because technically the sire doesn't have that right over them. Though, if a sire wished to petition a prince and say, as their sire, I feel I need to do this and here are my reasons, often a prince will give it. You know, they might require boons for it, but, you know, they won't necessarily argue the situation. Especially if if the sire is an elder and they're saying, my kid screwed up and I need to be the one to take care of this, princes often be like, you go handle that. You do you.
Isn't that so nice of them to take that into consideration? Good old prince.
Good old prince, yeah.
The prince, with that, if the prince says go ahead, then that kindred's life is forfeit. But there's also another thing that the prince can call that deems a member of that domain's life forfeit.
Ah, yes, the blood hunt. The blood hunt. So if a prince decides a kindred's life is forfeit, and if that kindred is not immediately present, then the prince will often call what is called a blood hunt. And what that is that the prince formally declares before the court that a vampire's life is forfeit, and that the convicted kindred has until midnight to flee the domain with their unlife, never to return unless they want to face retribution. If they don't make it out, well, sucks to be you. You didn't run fast enough. And you can be killed by any kindred in the domain, not just the scourge. Any kindred, and it'll be absolutely forgiven. If you make it out of the domain, though, you can live to see another night, but you better not come back while that prince is still sitting in the domain.
Hey, but that's not fair. I mean, if you're not present, then you don't. How do you know a blood hunt's been called? You could just be walking down the street and be like, "Hey, Joe Kindred, I'm just on my way to court. What's going on? Hey, what's that stake in your hand? Uh-oh."
Sucks to be you. Sucks to be you. This is not democracy.
That's right.
There's no like fair justice before the law. There's no jury of your peers. That's not how this works.
That's it. Jen, you've heard of amber alerts and silver alerts. I'm putting out a red alert. Blood red alert. Looking
for a warning to all kindred who might have a blood hunt on them, huh?
That's right.
Ping on their cell phones. You have been formally blood hunted by the prince.
You have until midnight to vacate the domain.
You have 4 hours to vacate this domain. If you do not, any vampire who finds you can kill you.
By the way, have a nice evening. They have a head start.
Yes. So that's the important thing with the blood hunt is that if they get it in enough time, they do have a head start and can get out. If they're a late sleeper, if they were hanging in the club, didn't see the red alert, then and they walk down the street and they run into Joe Kindred, well, sucks to be you.
Right. And speaking of the blood hunt, also the prince can set the terms of the blood hunt. They can simply say, instead of saying, hey, if you find him, kill him, you could say, no, find him, capture him, and bring him here. The prince can also declare, the open hunt. That's if anybody finds them, then you could be rewarded for a confirmed kill by a member of the domain.
Yes. And then there's the situations where the prince gives the right of diablerie. This is rare indeed, because like I said, most Camarilla kindred are like, oh, diablerie, that's cannibalism. Ooh, shame, shame, bad, bad. First of all, because they frown upon it, that's a big deal. So you have to really think about, am I willing to take up the prince's offer of diablerie? Nigh on to cannibalism, people give you the side eye. So to diablerize someone is a good way of getting yourself on the blood hunt list. So you have to consider, like, if the prince is sanctioning it, that's a rare prize indeed. But there's a second point you have to consider, and that is that, yes, the prince can sanction it, it gets swept under the rug, but it's still a kind of scandalous thing. I mean, anyone with aspects who can read an aura can see that you have a black line in your aura. Oh, you diablerize someone. What's up with that? So it's still kind of that. It's still shady. The prince can declare it as a prize in a blood hunt, but this is highly unusual, and it would be because it would be a mark on you. It would be literally and figuratively writ all over you. So you would have to permanently like carry like a piece of paper saying, I diabarize this person on the orders of the prince at this time and date. So that if you ever leave the domain and you go into another domain, you can explain yourself.
Right. But the prince is not the only one that can call a blood hunt.
Yeah. Blood hunts can also be called by archons and justicars. Especially because they hold the ranks that they do on a global level with the Camarilla. And so often when they call a blood hunt on an individual on that level, that's a pretty bad individual. On top of that, whole clans, like an entire clan, could declare an individual's life forfeit for one reason or the other. Especially if there is an individual that has offended the entire clan for doing something. And that's a truly amazing individual indeed. So people who are wanted by archons or justicars or who are hunted by an entire clan, they often have bounties on their heads. So it's not just like, the blood hunt, you got 4 hours, get out of Dodge. It is, there's a bounty on your head, and if any kindred who is able to hunt you down and kill you, or hunt you down and bring you to us, then they're going to get a reward for basically being a bounty hunter. And if they do it successfully, they win a trophy. And those who've won these trophies are known as Alisters. And they're literally branded with a magic trophy on their hand. So anyone who sees their hand, like even with a glove on it, you can see like this magic trophy sigil on their hand that indicates, I'm an Alistair. I hunted down one of these people who was on like the wanted list and brought them to justice. Look at what a badass I am.
Ah, okay, that answers my question. I was going to ask, like, this isn't an office or anything. It's just sort of a title that everybody in the Camarilla has to recognize. Yeah,
it's a title. It is. It's not an official office in any way, shape, or form. It is basically you have managed to hunt down someone who is blood hunted or wanted by a Justicar, an Archon, a clan, someone on a big scale. And and in your success, people should respect you, because anyone who's managed to get wanted on that level by the Camarilla usually is pretty hard to catch.
Right. And speaking of wanted by the Camarilla, there have been instances where the inner circle of the Camarilla has said, hey, you have done a really naughty thing, you criminal, you, and put them on the red list themselves.
Yeah. So there is this above and beyond anybody that the Justicaria or the Arcanet or a clan could want. There are some criminals who are their crimes are so heinous, the inner circle actually has a list of the Camarilla's most wanted, essentially. It's basically 10 vampires who are so heinous. They are the most wanted vampires in all of the world. And it's called the Red List. If you're a Red Lister, that means you did some bad shit. I mean, it wasn't just being naughty. It was, you really have crossed a lot of lines. And so when you're a Red Lister, the inner circle of the Camarilla, the head honchos of the entire sect, declare you anathema. You have no protection in the Camarilla whatsoever. It doesn't matter what city you flee to. There is no protection for you. And the individuals on this list are really, truly some of the most dangerous individuals in the entire world. They're smart, they're cunning, they're extremely powerful, and it would take a very powerful kindred to go and hunt them down. So those who manage to claim a trophy from a Red Lister are known as Red Alisters, because they managed to capture someone who is anathema. And they're branded with a magic red trophy. So a regular Alistair, you just caught like somebody who stole something from Clan Tremere. You get just a regular trophy. But a red Alistair, yours glows bright red. And that means not only you're a badass, you're the baddest of the badasses, because you got a red lister.
That would definitely be something I'd like to have as on my character, but sadly...
Not everybody's that cool, John.
Hey, and there's only 10 of them. I mean, come on.
There is only 10 of them, but several of those 10 have been on there for quite a while. The number one most wanted vampire in all... For a very long time, the number one person on the red list has been Camarilla, who is a Setite, member of the clan known as the Followers of Set. She's probably the most dangerous vampire in the entire world. I don't know anyone who will catch her. She's a legend. She's a legend. The Venture Justicar Lucinda and her have a little bit of a history that goes way back. Yeah, she's a toughie. She's by far the most dangerous vampire to capture. Also, the only known vampire to have ever survived wassail. So that tells you how badass Camarilla is. She's like thousands of years old.
You know what? I'll leave her for Theobald. He can handle her.
Yeah, Theobald, you go get that. You go get you some of that.
Yeah, that's all you, buddy.
You know what? Lucinda failed, but you might have better luck. Being a Bruja and stuff. You go work on that.
Maybe. All right, so the short and short of this tradition, of the sixth tradition, is if you're not sure, leave the killing to the hands of the professionals.
Yeah. Unless you're willing to take the risk, just don't do it. It's just better not to risk it.
That's right. Your unlife is going to be tumultuous enough.
Yeah. So that's it. The traditions, they are the laws of the Camarilla. As John mentioned earlier, they really are the laws of just the Camarilla. The Sabbat don't recognize these laws. The Anarchs don't recognize these laws. The independent clans don't follow the traditions. They all have their own versions of a lot of these rules, of course. And that's because most of these vampires are drawing from the same ancient traditions. They have it in their own code of ethics. For the Camarilla, they consider them barbaric codes of ethics. Mm. They aren't civilized like the Camarilla.
Well, you know what? For the most part, as long as they have something like a masquerade, that helps them at least helps them out half the time.
The Sabbat, for example, does have the Silence of the Blood, which, they don't really keep the masquerade, but they also know it's stupid to try and court human attention because they will send hunters. So they try not to draw too much overt attention to themselves. They don't want to pretend to be human, but they're not going to say, "Hey, hunters, come find us here," because they know that's just suicide. But the Sabbat freely practices diablerie, which is a big no-no with the Camarilla. The Giovanni and the Setites, they don't have any need for status or protocol or structure, so they really just don't care about all the hierarchy and concepts of domain and, thine eldest, and, because they have their own clan structures that they rely on, that's how they order themselves. Anarchs just pretty much, ignore any sense of decorum altogether because they're like, live free or die, bitches! Well,
they're anarchs.
Yeah, so a lot of these laws they don't care nearly as much about because they're like, well, I don't have a thine eldest, fuck off, so you'll find in their cultures, their rules and regulations differ because their cultures are just different from the Camarilla.
Right. But it is these rules and these traditions that keep it does set them apart from other societies, but it keeps order among the Camarilla. They have the strength, they have the organization, they have the power, they have the influence over human society, and the traditions allow them to keep all of that.
Exactly. And the Camarilla does look down its very long and elegant nose at all these other vampires who don't follow the traditions, because that's what civilized society does, is they follow the traditions. The traditions are what set them apart as cultured vampires, for as far as that gets them. The traditions are part of what gives them the strength of organization, of power, of influence. And if they didn't have their traditions, they wouldn't have the organization they need to be able to have the influence that they do.
And guess what, kids? Those are the traditions.
Yay!
Yay!
Guess what? You took like what? How many years of law school in just one podcast?
That's amazing.
Podcast. You have your JD in Camarilla law now. You can maybe pass the bar on that. Maybe. Not really.
No, not at all, actually. But we'd like to think so, because again, that's, part of this podcast is to help educate you, the player, on everything that you're going to need to know to navigate this game and the unlife that it puts you in. One thing to keep in mind about all these laws is that there are loopholes, there are gray areas and ways to get around them. Heck, you can even find ways to break them and not get caught.
Yeah. And you know what? We would be pleased as punch to hear some of the ways you guys have thought of to get around any one of these laws. So this is a great time to reach out to us via Twitter, via Facebook, via Gmail. Tell us your ideas. How do you get around some of these laws? What are the gray areas? What are the loopholes? What are the ways that we can interpret laws? What are some of the problems with these laws? It would be great to hear your feedback on this.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have, like Jen said, we have the Facebook page, Twitter. Who knows? You might actually learn something from another listener that says, hey, I didn't think of that. I'm going to use that. Yeah.
Believe me, there's some tricks. There's some dirty tricks out there. Some people are like, hey, but you could do this. I'm like, oh, you could do that, So yeah, talk to each other, share your ideas.
Yes, I absolutely want to give a big thank you to all those listeners who have already reached out to us via our email or Facebook page. I'm glad that, Jen, the response has actually been pretty good. We've got people saying, it's great, it's fantastic.
I'm so pleased. I'm so tickled. Oh, I'm so glad. Thanks, guys. I mean, we're very passionate about this game, and we're passionate about sharing this with you, and we hope you guys enjoy it, and talk to each other, sit there and share war stories, share tips of the trade, hold the hands of the newbies. What are things that you have learned in your long experience that newbies could gain benefit from?
Absolutely.
We look forward to hearing from you.
All right, so make sure you join us next time, where we're going to be discussing a tricky part of playing the Camarilla. What is that, Jen?
Status.
Ah, yes, the Camarilla, the original mean girls of the vampire world.
Yes, either you have status or you don't have status, and if you don't have status, you're nothing. So, status, I have to admit, is a big old pain in the butt. I hate status as a player. I'm like, this is stupid. But it's a complicated area, status, and with it, boons, which status and boons tend to go together. So, because it's so complicated, guess what? It's going to be an ST corner.
That's right. We're going to call in one of the big guns to help us explain this as best we can, and how it can benefit you, the player, to the utmost degree.
Yeah, you don't want John and I trying to explain status, because I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm acknowledged. Is that good?
Is that good?
Yeah, what is this infamy? What, I don't understand. What, I don't, is that bad?
Vulgar me? Is vulgar bad?
Is vulgar? Yeah. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to be calling in some help to help us, navigate that and explain it to you, so you don't get lost, we don't get lost, and we all come out the end learning something new.
Yay!
Yay! All right. Well, that wraps it up. I want to make sure that everybody knows that we are available on iTunes. We are also on YouTube, as well as the Podbean app. And also, you can just take the RSS feed and put it in your favorite podcatcher.
That sounds like we're legit and stuff.
I tell you, we grow week by week.
We're bona fide.
Yoo-hoo!
So, Wow, that's kind of exciting. So go check us out on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast receiving app is.
That's right. And remember to find us at the Podcast by Night Facebook page.
And By Night Podcasts on Twitter.
And at podcastbynight@gmail.com.
We love to hear from you guys.
All right. And with that, I am John Long.
I'm Jennifer Wolf.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.